Consumer and producer surplus. In Chapter 4, we found the equilibrium price for supply and demand by finding the common quantity and price. Today we're going to talk about consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is the consumer's gain from trade, which asks the question, how much did I save? And here's the equation. It's an integral from A to B of the equation minus the equilibrium price times the equilibrium quantity. Producer surplus is the supplier's gain from trade, which asks the question, how much money did I make? And to find the producer surplus, you take the equilibrium price times the equilibrium quantity minus the integral of the supply equation. The selling price is the price we're willing to sell for. Now, when you're given a graph and the equations are linear, then you can just find the area between the equilibrium line and the graph. So the supply and demand curves of the product are shown below. Approximate the difference in total gains from trade if the price is artificially increased from an equilibrium price of $95 to a price of $110. So what happens when we change the price that the producer or supplier can charge from $95 to $110? What happens to that quantity? Does the quantity increase or decrease? Well, let's look at that. Here is our equilibrium price at $95. The quantity at $95 is 100. So if we change our price to 110, and we are looking at the demand curve because those are the people who are going to buy it, then you come down from this point, come down to this point, and we see it decreases to about 85 units. What does the consumer and surplus, what does that do to consumer and producer surplus? At equilibrium, we have P at the equilibrium price, we have 1/2 times 100. 100 is our quantity, or our distance also, times 190 minus 95. Well, the person wanted to sell it at $190, but now we're selling it at $95. So what does that do to our surplus? Consumer surplus, we have 190 minus $95 times 100 times 1/2, because we have a triangle. That gives us a surplus of $4,750. Producer surplus, the area between the supply curve and the horizontal line at the price, equilibrium price, we have 100 times 1/2 times 100 times 95 minus 30 is our lowest price that the supplier would ask, and that gives us the producer surplus of $3,250, which is the difference between the desired selling price and the actual selling price. Now, if we change it to $110, what does that do? Well, we saw that it changed our quantity to 85 instead of 100, so we have 1/2 times 85 times 190 minus 110. That gives us $3,400. Producer surplus is the area between the supply curve and the horizontal line at P plus, which is the new price. 1/2 times 85 times 110 minus 30 plus 110 minus 85 is equal to $4,462.50. When you add those together, you get $7,862.50. The equilibrium quantity and price and quantity for supply and demand curves, when they're not linear functions. The demand curve is, but the supply curve is not. So for the supply curve, you are going to have to estimate, here is my equilibrium point, so I'm going to go over here, that's 30, so I'm going to count all of these boxes in here. And I counted them to be approximately 7, so my consumer surplus and producer surplus are given. Now if we have equations, the demand curve P is equal to 35 minus Q squared, and the supply curve of P is equal to 3 plus Q squared, find the producer surplus when the market is at equilibrium. So we have to find the equilibrium first. 35 minus Q squared is equal to 3 plus Q squared. We calculate, simplify, and we get 4 is equal to Q. Q star is the equilibrium quantity, which is equal to 4, and the price at that quantity, or for that quantity, would be 19, given these equations. So now we have to use the integral from 0 to 4 of the demand equation and for the supply equation. So let me show you how to put that into the calculator. And that calculates our area, which is this, minus 76. So then we have an area of 42.667. So now we go to y equals, and we're going to plug in both of the equations. So I have the demand equation and the supply equation entered into y1 and y2. Now I'm going to turn off y2, and you just do that by hovering over the equal and press enter, and then we're going to graph y1. Now I'm going to make sure my window is correct because this 35 is my y-intercept, so I'm going to go to window, and I'm going to leave my x's alone, but I'm going to change my y max to 40. Now press graph, and you should see that graph appear. To plug in the integral, you press second trace. We want number 7, and we're going to go from 0 to 4, so we press 0, then 4, making sure you're on the correct equation. And we have that area, which is 118.6667, which is right here, minus 19, the price, equilibrium price, times the quantity, equilibrium quantity of 4, which is 76. That gives us an area of 42.667. The producer surplus, we will go back to y equals. We'll turn off y1 and turn on y2 and graph. And now we are going to do the same thing. Second trace, number 7. I'm on the red graph. It's asking for the lower limit. I'll press 0 and enter. And the upper limit is 4 and enter. And there would be the area under the curve. 76, which is 19 times 4 minus that area, is equal to 42.667.